As a creative soul, with the good fortune of having my creative talents across, the disciplines of art, industrial design, and architecture, these statements really resonated very loudly with me. I believe that real change, positive change, requires creative thinking. And our ability to work outside of the box. At times this means taking calculated risk, to achieve things that haven't been done before. For this reason, quite often creative people are misunderstood, and misrepresented, and in many cases not treated with the same reverence or seriousness as other disciplines. For this reason, I also advocate for architects and all creative people to play a part in our future development. As a proud Canadian, I would like to do the same. My practice, which is called COCO, it stands for the Caribbean Office of Cooperative Architecture. I chose this name for my studio. The idea first came to me after seeing my mother enjoy a global brand of cocoa tea, which is ironic in the context of Grenada, considering the fact that we export raw cocoa only to re-import it at a higher price. This calls to question the use of our resources and the fact that we should be making more of them and to really reap the benefits of what is rightfully ours. It also calls to question how Grenada positions itself to fit within the wider global context and our dependency on the first world for economic survival. Now, I have a list here of topics that I will be covering tonight in tonight's presentation. What I will also be doing is doing some readings from my monographs, which will explain how COCO has addressed some of these issues through our past, present, and some of our future projects, and both built and unbuilt works. It's really to express the ideas, so whether they're built or not, I think it's important because these ideas are, I think are important to discuss. Okay, so the first topic is planning and development. I keep going back. Now, a critical concern of critical importance, really, for the island is really, which we don't have, is a national zoning plan, which have advocated for many years. I think it's important, obviously, we can all agree that development is essential for economic growth. However, how we manage the development and the choices we make will ultimately determine the quality of life for the future of the island. Without a firm understanding of the type of development which we permit, backed by proper legislation, and properly enforced, the fabric of our communities will be quickly eroded. We are all aware of a number of projects at various stages of design and construction which such a plan would have greatly benefited. From a personal perspective, for projects to be successful, they require a strong concept. I'm a firm believer in due diligence and managing all aspects of projects, which includes scaling them appropriately for their particular sites. I would rather see quality over quantity. By scaling things, you can put less of a burden on infrastructure, which our infrastructure obviously needs work. Along with this, we need to have strict environmental protection to ensure that we can maintain the beauty of the island. Now, for my first reading, I will discuss a project which is the Venice Biennale project that we presented, which was basically a project that was designed that did double duty, which I sort of mentioned in my acceptance speech, that it provided both coastal protection and also restored civic space to the Carnage. Now, I've had for many years, concern about St. George's, and some of the sort of larger urban issues I will be dealing with in my later writings will encompass that. But what I've done in the first couple of volumes really is to just sort of highlight some of the areas like traffic and some of the issues that need to be addressed, but not in a holistic way. But that is part of what I think is absolutely necessary, and I will continue as I develop my work going forward. Okay, so the first reading, the Carnage Urban Revitalization Effort, CURE. A rethink of the urban model of St. George's, the historic capital town of Grenada, unearths strategies for reversing the disintegration of the fabric by rejuvenating its connective tissue and public spaces to support ideals of community, equity, and inclusion. It represents a search for a distinctive regional trajectory in architecture rooted in place, a synthesis of the Caribbean cultural and geographical idiosyncrasies, its social and economic imperatives, and ubiquitous environmental concerns. A vision to re-inject public life into the urban space of the harbor. The revitalization of the Grenada House of Parliament are examined in relation to sustainability, commercial viability, resilience to natural disasters, and changes to the global ecology. Lost public space of the town is reinstated vis-a-vis a promenade that ensconces the Carnage, adding a protective layer to ensure climate resilience and sustainability for the harbor. The promenade creates an active zone of leisure and cultural activities precipitated by the refurbishment of the National Library. Its space and the surrounding built environment becomes the incubator where a new vibrant center of knowledge and innovation is spawned. Vestiges of the town's history are refashioned. Cobblestone pavements match the original surface treatment of the town roads. An iconic pavilion pervades over the reclaimed territory, wrapped in a woven tapestry evocative of the traditional craft of basketry. The activation of an urban beltway heralds a revitalized economy. Control of the island's productive sector is restored by its people. So essentially, it's just it's a concept of creating a promenade, which, as I say, restores civic space, but also provides coastal protection. Again, this is one thought about how to deal with one segment of St. George's, but I think, obviously, as I say, in further work, I think what has to happen is a sort of comprehensive plan overall to look at, how it works currently and any new projects or additions, how they interface. So this just describes essentially this promenade. So it's like an elevated platform. So essentially it extends out and it sort of wraps the perimeter of the Carnage. And what I was looking at here was, with regards to traffic. My idea of the, I like the idea that the Carnage can, maintain its original use as a working port. So how do you deal with traffic? So what we looked at here was a condition where you have a lay-by so that trucks can offload, but at the same time, traffic can keep flowing. Historical preservation. And this is a big one. You know, since I've repatriated to Grenada over 2 decades ago, which is a very long time, you know, I've seen the continued destruction of many of the historical buildings. You know, it goes unabated. You know, this destruction obviously outside of, you know, natural, you know, disasters, hurricanes and floods and termites and so forth. You know, many of our historical buildings are not either well maintained or they're altered in a manner not keeping with the architectural style, or in many instances, destroyed to make new development. There's little or no attempt to preserve our history, which again goes back to a lack of enforceable legislation. The forts of St. George's are examples of historical buildings which need urgent attention. I've always described them as non-productive assets of our state. You know, I've heard recently of a project to restore Fort George. To what extent, I don't know. But the important thing, I think, is that I think a lot more needs to be done, should be done, you know, to capitalize on the potential. For example, with Fort George, I mean, we should have displays which talks not just about its colonial history, but its more recent history, the Revolution, for example. You know, so that we're repurposing the forts. Work also could extend to Fort Matthew, Fort Frederick. I mean, as a lover of the arts, I think this would be a perfect place to house a National Gallery and Museum. You know, it's away from town, there's no traffic, and it has tremendous potential. We need to repurpose our historical buildings and have them make use of them. Even this Parliament building that we're in is underutilized. You know, it really hasn't fulfilled its intended program, you know, for use by the public. And I'll say this clearly. This presentation space was intended as a cafe space for public tours of the building, you know, with gallery and displays and exhibitions. You know, there are many examples of Parliament buildings, such as the Reichstag in Germany, which has been developed to have the public as a vital actor within the use of the facility. And we can do the same. Our concept for this Parliament building, which is based on fortification, lends itself to guided tours. You know, what I thought of, this diagram here just describes, you know, a tour which can happen from Fort George, the Parliament building, Fort Matthew, Fort Frederick. But again, by getting people there, what exactly are they going there for? I mean, it really should be, there should be attractions, there should be other things that would, you know, that should be developed for these buildings. Even this Parliament building, you know, part of our original brief, we had a pavilion which is to the west here, and this was there's a Harry Belafonte film, Island in the Sun, where they pan out and they show the carnage. So the idea was to remake this pavilion in some sort of form and create a sort of garden, you know, tropical garden where you sort of, you know, walk down toward it. So again, creating different moments and different experiences so that when people come to a facility, a public civic building, that there are different moments and different things that they can experience within it beyond the sort of envelope of the building. This is just an idea that, you know, I term it as reclaiming the fortified system. Again, it goes, you know, we just generated these images just to show potentially for Matthew, you know, how do you build on ruins and so forth. So just different ways of how one can begin to kind of, reclaim the forts. Yeah. All right, so adaptive reuse, that's the next topic. Now, this is a project I'm going to discuss that, Cocoa tendered for, and it's actually an active project. So, but I think it's important for me to discuss it simply because, we weren't awarded the project, unfortunately, despite the fact that this project was awarded a top finalist in the international design class adaptive reuse competition. Sadly, I think the project, in my view, it will be, I think that for the town of Grenville, which is where it's placed, I think that the problem for me is that our project really was quite an upgrade and transformation for the urban fabric, to create a new town center. But more importantly for me is the fact that a historical landmark will be demolished. So adaptive reuse. So this is my next reading. Today, erasure of historical traces in the landscape is unbridled due to inadequate legislation and a pervasive apathy toward the merit and value of their restoration. Grenada's second largest town, Grenville, located on the Atlantic coast, possesses one of the few remaining colonial buildings now slated for demolition. Adaptive reuse of this magnificent Georgian landmark reimagines it as host to a new urban center, activating and infusing purpose into a building left abandoned since it was gutted by fire over a decade ago. Restoring its distinguished brick facade allows it to embrace a new commercial program, yet assert its historical consonance as a scenographic marker throughout the new spaces framed within its walls. At street level, the old eastern facade reaffirms its civic presence. It is porous, inviting pedestrians into a courtyard engaged in a dialogue between contrasting vestiges of different eras. Growing upward and respectfully set back from the old facade, new interior spaces hover over the ground level parking connecting the two main arteries of the town. Despite Grenville's clustering of commercial buildings looped around Ben Jones Street and Victoria Street, the town suffers from congestion and lack of a designated center. Sitting in the low-lying basin of l'Abbé, the town is predisposed to frequent flooding. As in other coastal Caribbean towns, climate resilience has introduced critical design parameters. The new Grenville Commercial Center is conceived as a catalyst for improving the town fabric. To offset Grenada's high energy cost, green building technology is embedded within the framework, including photovoltaic cells, a solar chimney, a reflection pond to provide passive cooling, low E glazing, and a water collection system. Elevating the commercial level safeguards them from flooding while maximizing on-site parking below. The site is recast as a main attractor for Grenville. A dynamic, transformative architecture emerges at the interface between the old and the new. At the western entrance of Ben Jones Street, a monolithic stairway with seating tiers and an accessible ramp leads to an elevated public plaza. Stylized canopy, a stylized solar canopy represents a more contemporary portal, broadcasting progressive new ideals and the reinvigoration of a landmark. The plaza offers the public a reprieve and a place to meet away from the crowding at street level. Currently, no such space exists within the town. Built on its past foundations, the proposed commercial facility brands its spirit and legacy into the conscience of the community as a protected cultural asset. As a small developing state, Grenada relies heavily on tourism. Conservation of its unique sense of place, its history, and its environment are paramount to ensure sustainability for a prosperous future. So essentially, the big idea behind this project really was, because of the flooding in Grenville, we chose to elevate all of the commercial spaces and left the parking at ground level. The envelope of the Georgian building is retained, and we build up from there. The circulation with Ben Jones Street, you have an in and out, so we're following the traffic pattern of Grenville. So this is essentially it. So you go in one way, you go into Ben Jones Street, and then you exit on the other. So as you can see, all of the spaces are elevated above. And then reinforcing the existing Georgian building. So this image just shows the parking and going into it. This is what it would look like restored. So again, reinforcing it, and but leaving the facade there. So there's this sort of very strong contrast between and the old and new. So that skin of the old building is left as a marker. Because of the pedestrian, circulation is very tight, what we thought to do was to create a sort of courtyard space. So you give a bit of a release from the sidewalk, and so you sort of, so the building's not sort of pressed up against the sidewalk. Because as for many people, I guess, who've walked into Grenville, they know they have certainly experienced how the sidewalks, how they can be very congested. So this just shows some of the spaces that we developed, the interior spaces. As I described, we have green building technology that we introduced, where we had a pond with a solar chimney, and essentially to use the site and the environment to the best advantage. The interior space. And essentially, again, on Victoria Street now, to, again, have the building set back, so again, it offers some release, for pedestrian traffic from the sidewalk. And, of course, the crown jewel is the elevated plaza, which becomes, a place where, I describe it more as a town center. All right, so next topic, green spaces. Green spaces really are important consideration for me, alongside the built environment. And particularly in urban settings, they shouldn't be afterthoughts, as residual spaces. Most cities and towns have designated green spaces. Central Park is an example in New York City. Closer to home, the Savannah, Port of Spain, to cite a couple of examples. Similarly, for us, the retention of green spaces, we should be retaining those. It offers a place, as I say, a release and a reprieve and a place of relaxation. Over the years, we have lost our green spaces due to development. The botanical gardens is really the prime example. It's only botanical gardens in name, right? This project here is just an idea. What we're looking at is, most people don't even know this is a park, supposedly, Tricentennial Park, which is a park, again, in name, but not developed. So the idea was conceptually, again, looking at, as described for me, there are many sort of moments within St. George's and things that, of how we can improve certain aspects of it. So this was just, again, we have the park there, park in name, but what I thought to do is, okay, how could you develop which is really more of a residual space? It can become, again, a kind of botanical garden. And, you know, just having this inclined elevator, which allows you to go up and down. Again, these are thoughts in terms of, I'm not, these aren't definitive solutions, but again, this is really just the sparky idea to say that, you know, we have these residual spaces that we don't do very much with. And that just shows, you know, looking down from it. Okay, so the next.
Can you go back to the slide prior to
This one?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
That's exciting. The orange.
Yes.
Is that a zip line?
No, it's more of it's an incline elevator. So, you know, elevators can go vertical, but they can also go at an angle. So the idea is to, again, because I've been looking at different elements in both vehicular and pedestrian circulation in St. George's, just looking at a way that, okay, if you're up at the fort, how can you get down instead of, you know, going around? It could be a very simple way to do it. So again, these are just thoughts. They're not, you know, I haven't flushed them out. But again, it's just to kind of spark ideas of potential ways that we could do that. Yeah? Okay. Yeah?
I was transported in one of these across the forest tops
A zip line.
inside
Yeah.
Australia.
Right.
And it's very efficient and thrilling.
Right.
I've never seen it suggested in an urban.
Yeah. I mean, this is not a zip line, huh? To be clear. But right? But it's just, again,
It's similar.
yeah, it's similar. Yeah. Because it's an efficient way to get you from different heights instead of, walking or, Anyway, so this is just one idea. Right. So green spaces, and continuing with that, my next reading, which is a project that we worked with for the Rotary Club of Grenada. It's Quarantine Point Park. We designed a pavilion, and I thought it's, again, speaking of green spaces and a need to improve, expand on them. So I'll read my concept behind how I would envision that the park itself could be further developed. Quarantine Park Point. Oh. Right. With an aura of intrigue and a promise of spectacle, Quarantine Point has casually hosted visitors and events for many decades. Yet this 9.5 acre retreat in the southern tourist belt of Grand Anse counts among a rapid depleting list of green public spaces in Grenada. The vision of Quarantine Park is one that invites and welcomes the public, encouraging a communion with nature and a pause for contemplation as part of Grenada's history. It aims to create a destination where one lingers and takes refuge from the ever-advancing urban environment. It hones the natural features and uses the site to redefine and reveal Quarantine Point Park as undoubtedly a public good and a jewel worth preserving in the map of Grenada. Conceptualized as a series of undulating frames that respond to the gently sloping terrain of the site and convey an impression of transparency, airiness, and lightness, the pavilion is envisioned to be the new centerpiece of a veritable portal to the park and the ocean beyond. It is designed for efficiency of construction, local craftsmanship, and material sensitivity to the natural environment. The repetitive prefabricated timber frames and pivoting screens are fastened to a concrete base that appears in place to hover over the ground. The architectural vision of Quarantine Park stems from an imperative to maximize engagement and perception of the site by the public as the primary recreational destination in the south of the island, as well as to ensure its sustainability through facilities for revenue generation. The plan entails construction of a new pavilion, playground, and parking area, promotion of accessibility to the beach, water sports, and enhancement to existing pathways, picnic spots, and rest areas with solar lighting, furniture, and landscaping. The surrounding natural grade falls away gently so that the relative height of the western end of the pavilion slab allows it to double as a stage overlooking the main outdoor grassed entertainment area. Combined with the flexibility of operable screens, the pavilion can be configured as required to enable hosting of a range of large events, including concerts, festivals, weddings, all set against the dramatic natural vistas of the site. The lofty roof and high-level wooden screens also offer a respite from the relentless sun and sanctuary from the rain. The new parking lot is shielded from the view to its discrete location along the southern slopes of the site. Different experiences of the site unfold as visitors retrace upgraded paths etched previously into the ground by countless pilgrimages in order to savor generous views from two iconic lookout points on the bluff. Among the amenities offered along the way are a children's playground at a higher elevation to the eastern portion of the site, and a cookout area overlooking the bay at the southwest. So essentially, the pavilion, which is the center of the park, and this is how it sort of played out. So again, it can have various functions. What I described is a sort of undulating framework, sort of going with the topography of the site. So it can become, the space can become a stage, for concerts and so forth, or hosting different events. Right. Okay, so for my fourth reading now, I've chosen a project which I think it's a development project which we're hoping is still active. It's a site that we developed. We've been working with a developer, in recent times. But I chose this project because it really demonstrates how we approach, building, doing a larger scale development, working with the environment. Now the site is called, the project is called, I've named it Bird of Paradise. So I will do the reading and then I will describe the project itself. Today, Grenada still possesses pristine sites that are prime for new projects. The challenge of development comes with risks and responsibilities. Balancing the impact of the environment and communities with a financially viable, long-term, sustainable model is the real dilemma at hand. Projects should have a strong conceptual base and raison d'être outside of a collection of buildings. Developments should be suitably scaled for their respective sites. The built environment should harmonize with nature and be infrastructure given top priority. It is within this framework that the Bird of Paradise was conceived, demonstrating how a gentle approach can be used to work with the particularities of its place and needs of its people it was designed to accommodate. Water is thought to be the precursor of life. In this context, a remote coastal site with a river gushing through its center is enlivened to stream the lifeblood of an exotic development, bolstering useful rejuvenation. Adding to the flow of the main artery are springs and baths that create a spiritual place of wellness, cleansing the mind, body, and soul. It is within a perceived Garden of Eden that the bird of paradise flourishes. Thick green foliage envelops the site, partially concealing yet revealing a fluid architecture nestled within its growth, and stemming from the spine of the flower. The creation of a wellspring with conjoining hot springs, bathing pools, and a river, along with an unspoiled beach, showcases the natural beauty of this breathtaking site. Core communal spaces are enhanced by spa and bathing enclaves occupying both sides of the river's edge. Collectively, these quiet and joyful features of the site define a special place for a one-of-a-kind experience, spawned by its life source. A man-made lake occupying the periphery of a manicured green space serves as a secondary water source, with a pleasing aesthetic that belies its origins. The lake contains repurposed wastewater strained through a biofilter to create a clean, natural pool that fosters a habitat well-suited for birds, fish, and fauna. Tiered, layered accommodations cut through the site, crossing the river and linking both halves. Coupling the accommodations on two levels is a scissor-shaped circulation path guiding leisure activities through interstitial spaces between the garden and the units. Viewed from the beach, luxury villas are splayed in an array that emulates the flower. Axial spaces are created with entry to houses via courtyards, open-plan living areas with views to the swimming pools and the ocean beyond. So essentially, the concept behind this really, the site is really split in two. You have a river that runs directly through the center, which could be really an impediment, but what we did was essentially use that as the driving force to develop the concept. So you create these sort of bathing pools, this natural oasis, if you have, around that. So you really, you're augmenting what's already there. And so you have this, area of leisure, bathing pools and so forth. So I described this here, as a way to deal with wastewater. This idea actually came from, I guess, a friend, a close friend, Leon Taylor, and what he did at La Source, where he used, created this, from the wastewater, created a really natural habitat. And so that was really the idea here, that with the wastewater we have a biofilter and then create this great space from it. I describe these as, they're paths that that sort of link the units, because the site is really, it's developed with both their condominium units and then their sort of beachfront villas. So again, inside of the condominium units, always looking back onto the river, so you're really always taking advantage of that view. And these are the villas which are at the front of the site, beachfront. There's a core service building which is at the center. I seem to be missing the site plan of it. No, that be said. Okay, so for my fifth and final reading, I want to introduce really Volume 3 and to speak about housing, which, truth be told, I mean, most of my built work, are houses. And I've, over the years, I've formed very close friendships with a lot of my clients. You know, obviously building a house is something that's very personal, and I really enjoy that. In fact, I have some clients here whose house, I've designed over the years. Okay, so that said, so housing. Following the completion of Volume 1 and 2 of this 5-part monograph series, Volume 3 focuses on the design of Caribbean homes, the factors which influence and how and why they are built in the way that they are. It traces the lineage and history, along with the instruments of their making, and the recurring themes, events, and circumstances which continue to impact our decisions to construct our homes in the way that we do. The work requires a deep understanding of the impending changes to the environment and potential adjustments needed to ensure optimum performance and resilience in the tropics. That resilience is measured against the robustness of the construction industry and our ability to provide adequately designed spaces to meet the demands of people. This entails deploying newer and more efficient technologies that facilitate better use of resources while building capacity to upskill the labor force. There's also a need to be cognizant of geopolitical and economic shifts occurring today, affecting supply chains, the use of imported materials from abroad, which are becoming increasingly expensive. To mitigate this issue, a more localized approach must be considered, simplifying the processes of building, incentivizing the use of local materials, and reinvigorating the craft of building through the development of local products. Despite our ever-changing circumstances, one factor remains: the humanizing and positive effect that well-designed spaces can have on the outlook of its occupants, to the extent that the quality of people's lives can be greatly enhanced by homes which are not only functional, but offer charm, intimacy, and aesthetic appeal. The single-family home, being the most common type of dwelling, is customarily surrounded by a yard or garden, which are essential to provide comfort, privacy, and security. This type of home, as can be said for all types of residences, should be the place where we form close bonds, the place where we grow and share cherished experiences with families, friends, and neighbors that retain in our individual and collective consciousness with the passing of time. The second notable housing category, described as a semi-attached and clustered dwelling, is quite often coupled with commercial spaces to create mixed-use buildings. This double occupancy is seen as a viable option as it maximizes land use. Not to be excluded from this grouping of residences, that of social housing, with shared functions and compact spaces. Although designed to accommodate people who are less fortunate, the quality of such spaces should not be less considered or diminished, despite the fact that they are typically built with an economy of means. Important to all typologies of housing accommodations is planning and the impact it can have on building safe and desirable neighborhoods and communities for people to live. For this reason, it is vital that we can look critically at the local housing stock on offer and adapting the typologies to suit the demands and particularities of our place and time. To understand how we can improve them by devising better strategies for longer life cycles, to build our homes to better reflect our history and culture, yet respond to environmental challenges, while simultaneously reaffirming our experiences for present and future generations. Architects, planners, as can be said for engineers, landscape and interior architects, along with contractors and suppliers, must re-examine our modes of operating. Conversations are needed across all disciplines of the design and construction industries, supported by consumers. This must also be coupled with well-crafted policies and the willingness for policymakers with a shared objective of streamlining processes to ensure efficiency, mitigate waste, and propagate a culture that provides for the likelihood of people to live in properly designed homes, something that is essentially a human right. So what I was talking about is, the possibility of looking at, development of products that, building products locally that can be integrated. On the right, Francis Carey was the 2022 Pritzker Laureate in architecture. I mean, I really enjoy his work because he does take that sort of localized approach to building, and wonderful, wonderful projects. So it's, again, considering where we are in this time and place. Welcome. So, with regards to social housing now, as we all know that, we've seen the social housing type that's been developed here in Grenada. But I guess for me, what I question, when you think about sustainability and the quality of spaces that we are providing, in the long term, we want to have our buildings, support communities. They should have all of the functions that we think of, social spaces, recreational spaces, leisure spaces. These are also really important, I think, to consider if we're thinking in the long term that we're developing a model for not just social housing, but housing in general. And to allow, for example, adaptability. Where, buildings can be expanded, and changed over time so that when families grow, they, certain additions. And there are ways of sort of setting that up. You can, provide a certain model that provides that it's easy to do that. Of course, the buildings need to also be built robustly, to mitigate hazards. Obviously we all know that we're in a, technically outside of a hurricane zone, but we are, earthquakes and flooding. And, essentially, over time, I think that the quality of our homes should promote, healthy living, social cohesion. These are all the factors that I think that constitute building homes that are going to be sustainable over time. And so one of the things that we will be developing further on is, a model for social housing, for tropical living. So, I always think that, historically, as an agriculturally based society, that, having your boots on the ground is always important. I think that sort of contact to the ground where you have, the ability to have natural airflow, garden, and that sort of thing, that's also very important. Because particularly in the tropics, I think it's important just for the comfort of living in a home. So I'm going to show a series of, for those who are not familiar with biophilic design, it's really the notion of, the contact with nature, because it has a profound, or can have a profound impact on human fitness and the quality of life. So it's essentially the incorporation of the built environment with nature. So again, the incorporation of light, air, ventilation, all of those things. And it's the type of work that I personally, I'm interested in, and it's the direction of my work as I continue to develop. So these are just some examples of, the integration of nature. The right image is my project, and this again just kind of shows how, potentially buildings integrate with nature. Having, spaces which are sort of inside out. I mean, the Parliament building is one of them. I mean, it's like a large veranda, as we all know. It's unconditioned, and that was a big part of it. The integration of water to have passive cooling. That's also quite important. So in a lot of our projects, we introduce ponds and so forth. The use of louvers, where, again, you're getting natural airflow through buildings. So as much as you can feel or experience the outdoors, all the better. And of course, the garden is also very important. Again, just, I always say that my buildings look better after a couple of rainy seasons, and the garden comes in, right? So that's very important. Again, the sort of open language of inside and out. And so again, the use of louvers and just the feeling that when you're inside, you're still outside. There's also, types of spaces that we create, courtyards and other spaces where, they become private but yet open. And again, this just an image of showing just the open language where you can close in the veranda space, but then open it as you need. Again, the sort of cross ventilation through the use of. And let me also say something that I don't have any slides of, but something that we try as best as we can is to introduce local craft. So, like for example, these doors and a lot of the louvers and so forth that we do, they're all locally built. We do have good craftsmen here, certainly. So we, as much as we can do things locally, we try to do that. I think it's for me, there's a sort of hand of the craftsman that I really enjoy in work. One can always import, a Scavellini kitchen or something, but there's something about also just the quality of the craftsmanship in doing things locally that I really enjoy. Again, just the sort of duality of indoor-outdoor spaces. Right, so that concludes my presentation.